Okay, looks like we are running, and let us get our little opening intro. Welcome to Evolution Hour on the 21st of April, 2025, in our ongoing years of doom during Trump 2.0. And again, tortuganwordpress.com, which has a whole bunch of PDFs that are openly available for everybody to share wantonly without any concern because they're free. Okie doke. So here we are, continuing in on. Okay, there we go. My face is full screen again. Slightly late because I'm busy plugging material in on black hole data for the cosmology chapter for volume 2 of The Rocks Were There. Ooh, it's just delightful. As a historian by trade and not having a degree in physics, let alone astrophysics or cosmology, it's always been an area of trepidation on my part, and I kind of skipped over some of the cosmology matters when I was doing. Hi, Lisa. I sort of skipped over a lot of the cosmology issues in dealing with the topic back in the Dwayne Gish era. That was the material that was in the old tip work that's at that website that I just alluded to. So needless to say, we know a hell of a lot more in 2025. So it's an absolute delight to be able to wind through. And the fact that virtually all of the technical literature on cosmology matters, astrophysics and stuff, is open access. So holy moly, it's handy. Whereas some of the geology and paleontology material is harder to find than some others. But anyway, that's as case may be. And we'll have a part 2 on the fascinating little issue of how source methods apply to real world politics. That relates to the Trump administration's falderall recently screaming about transgender mice and government funding of that. And fortunately, Dave Farina has done a really nifty little video. We'll get into all of that stuff and discuss the linkages and all that. Anyway, can I sue Trump for emotional distress? Actually, that's not a bad idea. You know, maybe we can. Trump will probably be functionally immune because of the stupid Supreme Court giving him kind of carte blanche on here. But all of the functionaries down below are quite a different kettle of fish. And so I hope they positively spend the rest of their sorry little lives embroiled in endless court suits where their legal fees run up faster than Rudy Giuliani's. And as we know from the Rudy Giuliani case, he's been ruined by his association with Trump. So it's not at all impossible to imagine that a heck of a lot of Trumpistas who are smug as all get out after the election and seeing the grand God King Emperor reinaugurated may regret their choices, especially as we hit the fan on economic disaster and retool in a lot of areas. In fact, the little twerp who, some little influencer who had given Trump a Cybertruck, the hideous Cybertruck, around the time of the election, has just been blathering on about how he's lost tens of millions of dollars as the stock market has plunged. Oh, boo-hoo. Oh, my. Teary-eyed. I am so schadenfreude sad for him. My. Anyway, on to our little main topic, cute little titans. And they're continuing their little section. I'm looking up the dregs of their material. On they're talking about coprolites and a whole bunch of stuff continuing. In fact, there's a curious little thing. In fact, I'll put up the image of it so you can kind of see what the heck is going on. That suggests that they did a last minute addition to the book. Because in this little section here that's in green, and then this little section down here in green, the footnotes for those are out of sequence compared to the other footnotes on the pages that they're on, which suggests that these, and they were tacked on at the tail end of the book. So I suspect there was a last minute addition of some of that stuff, and one of them involves a source that we'll be putting up on today's links. So I'm dealing with them in the order they are, page by page by page, independent of how they were organizing it in their footnotes. So one is an old paper from 2001 from Silacker et al. On how to distinguish whether a coprolite is coming from poop, or is it actually the stuff that's inside of an intestine that's been preserved in that form? And so it's more than you would ever want to know about the exciting world of coprolites. And I would not class it as a paper that they misrepresented, because they're not making any detailed claims about it in terms of their young earth creationist code. That went in my little category of, yeah, okay. But that doesn't help the overall case, because Sarfati and Tay are still running around 60% of their technical literature being misrepresented. So it's not helping them all that much. Like the next paper, De Palma et al. 2013 on a T-Rex tooth embedded in a hadrosaur bone. And that one is screaming bloody murder about the fact that Sarfati and Tay can't really argue that pre-flood carnivory is not a thing. And this is the fascinating issue is not so much that they have moved the goalpost. It's that they aren't really dealing with the fact that there was a goalpost to move, which is that the Henry Morris, Duane Gish era creationism was absolutely sure that carnivory only arrived after the flood. And it's been utterly untenable over the years. People from Wood and Kurt Wise and others who have recognized that no, there's actually evidence that there were red and tooth and claw prior to the flood, because they're preserved supposedly in the flood. So this has been a thing that creationism has evolved on, at least in certain quarters, which means it's a functional litmus test. Sounds like a book on Greek gods, yes. Yes. Well, I can tell you, if you want more entertainment, watch Clash of the Titans, the old Ray Harryhausen science fiction film, although it had an adequate remake. And in fact, I think they did a sequel. I think Liam Neeson was playing Zeus in that one, as opposed to Laurence Olivier in the original one. But it's a marvelous one. And as an aside, the screenplay for the original Titans was done by a fellow Beverly Cross, a guy who has the interesting distinction, I think, that he was the husband of Maggie Smith, who was playing the goddess Hera, I think, in the film. And he also had done the screenplay for Jason and the Argonauts years earlier. That's one of the classic Harryhausen films. So that it's a neat thing, because it conveys the Greek mythology as kind of on their terms. In other words, the gods are real and so forth and so on. And it has a very, very charming quality. I've always been quite pleased by them. So any Greek historian of Greek mythology and history has a nice feel to it. And plus, it's a way of thumbing your nose against all the people that want all the other religions to be non-existent. Well, heck, if you wanted to believe in the Olympian gods, here you got some neat little movies on it. Anyway, so the whole bit about that, first of all, it's a fascinating technical paper. Both of them, in fact, are. But the fact that the creationists have had to move the goalposts on the carnivory matter is a major detail, and we're going to be going into it in great detail in Volume 2 of Rocks Were There, in addition to all the little issues about where illnesses come from, exactly old is syphilis, and where did it come from, and all this kind of stuff. It's a topic that is very sparsely discussed in the creationist literature, and when it comes up at all, they kind of do a catch-all. Well, it's all due to the fall, and then not really think too much about it. But medical details are much more interesting on there. Now, the part 2 here relates to the matter of what Dave Farina did back in March of last year. And no, I'll take that back. It was just March of last month. Professor Dave explains he was pissed off by the bit that popped up, including at the, I think he did it in the State of the Union address, about the supposed money being spent to create transgender mice. and that this was going to be swept away in the Doge Luge, the Doge Deluge. Dave he was really pissed off by this, as was quite legitimate to be, because it was an example of pseudoscience and how the Trump administration was completely misrepresenting the source material. But the question is, what source material and how far away were they from it? So fortunately, most all of the links are available full out for you to take a look at, so you can follow this little daisy chain yourself, including the pivotal one, which will involve the listing of the papers. So Dave was building off of a list that ultimately traces back to the Washington Examiner, which is this conservative website. And the PDF involved is open access, fortunately, so I'll be having a link to that one. But part of the daisy chain is a little more complicated. So the first starting off is the Trump press release on this topic, which has the apocalyptic title, "Yes, Biden spent millions on transgender animal experiments." That was reflecting their viewpoint, and they were basically repeating the material ultimately that they're getting secondarily from this Washington Examiner post. And that fortunately the link to the thing is actually in the little excerpt, so you don't even need to be able to get past the paywall to be able to find the paper involved. So it's listing off all of these supposed papers, and there's some annotations and quotes. That was Dave had a field day, because they were actually putting up what they were regarding as the significant material. There were things like, molecular mechanisms of hormone-mediated sex differences in wound healing, and gonadal hormones as mediators of sex and gender influences in asthma, and so forth and so on. And the fun thing is when he's looking through all of this stuff, paper by paper by paper, it is not meaning what the Trump administration was implying, or for that matter, what the Washington Examiner was implying. They were indulging in exactly the same kind of authority quoting and misrepresentation that you would be seeing in a Kent Hovind, secondary source addiction and authority quoting. So if you want to see the danger of having a Kent Hovind level scientific illiterate charge of government, we're seeing it. We actually can take a look at all of that. What's amusing is most of the cases, well, not really amusing because it's a terrible misrepresentation of the source data, but often it was the case that in order to ascertain the effects of hormones in various cases, you need to be able to distinguish between how they affect males and females. And the transgender case is interesting because there you have a matter of men becoming women or women becoming men, and you can look at the differential on that. So this actually has a clinical utilization to be able to isolate the sex differences variations and give you further variables to play around with. So the vast majority of these papers don't have diddly squat to do with sex change, and that they're creating contexts where they can try things out. And so they're at no point are they trying, the goal of the paper is to make transgender mice for the purpose of some woke agenda. Yes, hi, Vesta. Yes, so it's an intriguing little thing. It also is relevant to work that Jackson Wheat and I are doing. If you've been catching some of Jackson's latest videos, he is now branching out, and it's his idea. He's been wanting to do this for quite some time, to deal with the whole issue of the pseudoscience of the Trump administration and the politicization of science and the role of right-wing conservative media in these sorts of things. And that's right up the alley of a book that he and I plan to be doing on the origin and impact of the conspiracy thinking mindset, which will include things like anti-vaxxer and climate science denialism and all that stuff. So this matter of the transgender mice falls directly into that little category. And I've been having fun inputting on his videos the material that relates to historical stuff, because my understanding of the history of how the switch between different attitudes about what liberal and conservative meant back in the 18th century and how it transformed in the 19th and the 20th century, and how even notions of what a neoliberalism is compared to what other people might think it is, that Jackson isn't old enough to have the kind of perspective that I've been able to help him on to bring everything up to speed. And it's been very, very useful. Oh, yes, it has been a little bit of a while. And of course, remember, for a few weeks there, my channel was bumped over onto a different mode. And so now I'm finally back to where I'm supposed to be. And that makes it very much nicer. And I must say, I missed the times because the people that were part of the regular audience that would be popping up now and then in the chat as we are, I wasn't getting that feedback. And I really do enjoy all of that. Another little thing, and I'll probably be putting a link up to it once the event happens, but there's a fellow, Ian Chen, friend of the channel, Patreon, was talking with dear fellow Austin from Michigan, and how global the unit is, because Ian is from like Australia. Anyway, he was saying that the Austin really kind of needed to talk with me because we shared a lot of similar interests. And as it turned out, Austin was familiar with me from years gone back, but then kind of fell by the wayside and had lost track, and now it was brought back in. So we had a nice little Zoom chat over my smartphone, and I'm going to be on his show in next Friday, I don't know whether I'll have an advanced link on it because he operates. I'm not sure what platform he's operating on at the moment. I think he runs it directly on a podcast. So anyway, yes, proud to be woke. In fact, we were joking in this in this chat because of all of the kind of nitwits who were complaining, wondering when they see the new Discovery series on Star Trek. On Paramount, and how they've got transgender people, characters, and gay relationships and all that. And this is the first series that actually went full bore on that. And they're going, when did Star Trek get woke? And I'm going, like the day it premiered back in 1966. It's always been, air quotes, woke. They just possibly didn't think about it or didn't put the pieces together all that well. So what can we do on that one? Anyway, so that serious topics about how method relates to direct into politics. For anybody that's under the silly impression that all of that scholarly footnoting crap, that's paying attention to references and the proper reading of sources and the proper presentation of sources and the verification of the accuracy of things and follow up and all of that multiple layered safeguards to try to make sure that the views you arrive at are grounded in sound reasoning and sound evidence. Those things fall apart when you deal with pseudoscience. One bad method to rule them all, as I'm fond of saying now. And we can see that in that transgender case, and we can see it in the pseudo economics of Lutnick and Navarro, who are not exactly live wires in the success department, except in the grift department. Lutnick is kind of a peripheral bond trader who makes money when bad times come along, because bonds do well under those circumstances. Whether or not how much there have been actual insider trading scandals is to some of these stock things. Looks like Marjorie Taylor Greene, a few of these people may have been pulling little fast maneuvers on that front. If we ever get a progressive reform era going, there may be an awful lot of hearings on these little things, and it will be an interesting little time to see what happens in that matter. Plus, we see the current implosion of Hegseth at the Defense Department. Guy way out of his depth, and an awful lot of competent people, even competent Republicans. There's this infighting between these cliques, which is all the same problem that we were seeing in Trump 1.0, and it's on steroids, because now you have the nastiness of what's going on with people whose expertise is kind of just at the host of a Fox Trump Pravda program. That's where Hegseth comes from, that level. And so these are, for those who are old enough to remember the old Peter principle, which is the idea that in a bureaucracy, you often get promoted past your level of competence, and then you get stuck there at an incompetent level. Well, boy, we've got Peter principle on steroids. So if my historical judgment turns out to be accurate, I was certainly shocked and surprised that Trump won in 2024. I was seriously expecting That it was really good signs that Harris would be elected and we would be nice on reform. But, well, there we go. That's what happened when we underestimated the number of people who decided not to vote, presumably because the vote of Harris was below that of Biden in 2020. And so that affected, because actually there was only about 3 or 4 million votes difference between Harris and that. And if all the people who had voted in the 2020 election for Biden had come in for Harris, you'd have 82 to 77, and bingo, things would have been different. At least in the popular vote. How that would have balanced out in the electoral college is another matter. But at any rate, we didn't get to that. So clearly there was a speed bump in that. And the more I look at the reasons why those extra millions ended up voting for Trump this time, is just screaming methods problems. These are people who are top-down philosophy, dogma, but they're not really paying too much attention to data field, or have only slight matters of data field, and they're not fact-checking stuff. And we see this in a lot of areas with people across the political spectrum, stuff that people who you might not think would be obvious fits in the Trumplandia thing, like some atheists, but they might have a certain conservative bent, and then they jump on the MAGA bandwagon, boom, boom, boom. But scratch the surface and start looking at their source field and how close or not they're getting to it. You're looking at Tortugan mines. And we've got a serious issue to deal with as we have moved into a world of fragmented media, where too many people are not getting their media from the same common pool. In the old days, zillions of people were watching Walter Cronkite on CBS. Now we have things fragmented and increasingly ideological, and it's known from when people look at the mixture and audience levels, right-wing screwball media have ginormous audiences, and therefore are having an enormous impact. And they can do highly professional looking things in the same way that Answers in Genesis videos can look really nice professional. And so, or for that matter, go over to Russia and you see the Putin state media. They're all very glossy, well-produced things in terms of the visuals. But the question is the content real? So until and unless we can popularize and instill the personal necessity that sound method needs to be done by as many people as possible and needs to be practiced by media. And so we can move beyond the mere talking heads issue to source methods analysis of, regardless of what your position is, up or down, in or out, if you're making a fact claim statement, you need to be able to offer documentation for it, and that can be putting forward for fact checking, which to some extent the fact checking is being done. But then they need to deal with directly pressing the people on whether or not they bothered to fact check what they came to believe. Because if they're believing faulty things, I would be flabbergasted with amusement to see some pundits try to grill Lutnick and Navarro, let alone President Trump directly, on how the hell they could justify their fictional world of the 19th century regarding the role of tariffs and what a golden age it was, and that it was due exclusively to tariffs. And it would be fascinating to see what sources they thought to offer for that, because they're not going to be able to pull that off from a factual documentation level. Therefore, if you have a full source methods analysis approach, and everybody is forced to play on that game, an awful lot of politicians are going to burst into flames. They're never going to be able to pull it off. Now, you'll still have a core group of people who will be voting for screwball notions because they're dogma-driven. Tony Perkins, Marjorie Taylor Greene types, presumably there are a bunch of them in her local district. That's why she got elected. These are people that are impervious to evidence in the same way that Kent Hovind is impervious to evidence. You can throw data at him and the like until the cows come home, and he will never bother to fact check anything he does, in the same way that Donald Trump doesn't fact check anything. And I don't think Vice President Vance does that. It's highly likely that you would be hard pressed to find anybody in the current Trump administration that knows how to, let alone does, serious fact-checking of source field. And so, boop, that's what you're getting. You're getting dogmatists who are disconnected from reality, and with untethered connections, they can float off into all sorts of absurdities and keep on doing stuff that's absolute nonsense. Now, they're slamming at the moment into a judicial system that they have some inroads with, but they don't overall control, and that is at both state and federal level. And so one of the possible bright signs will be the extent to which, even though they will be trying to, and to some extent will be successful for a moment, corrupting the judicial Justice Department and the FBI, Kash Patel and Bongino at the FBI are going to make themselves terrible nuisances. But at some point, you have to translate that into actual legal matters that are going to go into a court. And I would predict that, boy, they are going to have a terrible time ever getting a conviction, because it's going to crash and burn in the way that all of these people have done in this area. So it's going to be an interesting little time working out what the ramifications are at this level. It's a different context, for example, than what was happening in Germany back in the 1930s, when the big Prussian Junkers who were running the German court system in the old Republic kept at it during the Weimar years, and they would just look the other way when Nazis were coming up and for beating up some Jew on the street corner, or some socialist or communist, and that helped accelerate matters. And then they were complicit in the legalization of tyranny once Trump came to power, or Hitler came to power. We're not in quite that circumstance here, so it's a much more complicated thing. And looking at the colossally large rallies that Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders have been having in red states, my God, Nampa, Idaho, Montana, they've got a certain surge of things, and that's prior to the big crash. The economy does move into a depression era dynamic, which is what I'm fearful it's going to do. I can't see any breaks that would prevent that. It's even without being able to politicize and overrule the Federal Reserve, which the Trump administration will try to do. There's also limitations as to what the Federal Reserve can do in a depression environment. SCOTUS said no more illegal deportations. Exactly. That you've got the matter that the court has quite explicitly said you've got to stop doing this. And Steve Miller would get on the media and turn that ruling 180 degrees around as if it meant something else. This is the same level of spin that you would get if you were trying to listen to Kent Hovind talk about the fossil record. It's fantasyland stuff. Such minds should never have been in political power in any capacity whatsoever. We can observe now in gruesome detail just exactly how dangerous all of this is going to be. And the fact is, the one happy moment is that they are a minority of the population, and they do not have untrammeled access and control, although they're going to try to get it. That Project 2025 agenda is what they're going to attempt to do, and they will be able to do, to some extent, suborn and intimidate some. But Harvard University, which has got a ginormous endowment, so losing a couple $2 billion in federal money is not necessarily a fatal move on their part. We'll be seeing what happens with attempts to curtail. Well, one area that is vexing, but it's only going to be affecting for a while, is the fact that they will be doing everything they can to stop prosecutions of corruption within their own administration. So Elon Musk has been firing the watchdogs and trying to end things that were part of the process of investigating malfeasance on the part of Musk companies. Corruption up the yin yang, and a lot of that stuff will be subject to law and lawsuits in the coming years, assuming, of course, that the Trump 2.0 is not as successful as they want to be. It's going to make the 26 midterms very, very interesting to see what happens there. And then again, when we hit 2028, And I want an awful lot of Trumpistas to bear the brunt of the shock wave of disaster that will be coming out. And if, fortunately, I'm in a blue state, Washington State has an awful lot of protective areas. Right across the border is Idaho, Crazy Crane, a conservative state, although even in many of their cases, they've got surging elements. The same modalities of populist anger that helped fuel William James Bryan back in the 19th century, and that spirit is what fueled an awful lot of Trump. When those populists discover that Trump not only is not delivering for them, but could never have delivered for them, then there's going to be a wise up moment for a lot of them. You have to wonder how the hell they didn't notice this beforehand, because although virtually everything the Trump administration has been doing is terrible, none of it is surprising, not to me. So, yeah, Oregon is semi-blue. Oregon, like Washington, is a divided state in some areas. Most of the population in Oregon that are matters in are relatively massive population centers around Portland, and it's a huge block. But you move to the east side of the state, and you're out in rural farmland territory that has demographically much more in common with Crazy Train, Idaho, and most of eastern Washington state. We get a mixed bag here in Spokane because we're a larger metropolitan area. We've got a bunch of colleges. College towns, by their nature, tend to drag in an awful lot of liberal personalities as well as conservative, although there's districts and segments that are very conservative. So it's much more complicated. Fortunately, I'm not sure about the details of Oregon because I don't follow their politics, but Washington, fortunately at the moment, is not as tragically polarized as is the case in Minnesota and Michigan and some of these other states, which have been flipping back and forth and have rural divide, and to some extent in New York State as well, that's got a bit of a polarized divide. Heard it was really transgenic mice, which was implanting genes in mice that humans share to see how it changes their reaction. Yes, exactly. That's part of it. Some of the papers, in fact, are all on that. And the details will be gone into. Dave was really quite meticulous in working through all of these different technical papers and comparing the comments that the PDF was making from the Washington Examiner versus what the actual content of the papers were. And in several instances, they had right in front of their nose that the paper wasn't about the thing they were trying to make it into. And so I felt it was important to put it in, not only because it was related to topics that are going to be part of book projects, but also because it's a beautiful primer in how you go about investigating what the source content is on controversial issues. So you can have Dave Farina's video, and then you can go to the original source material that I'll be putting the links up to, and you can compare all of that direct material, and you can track down the various abstracts and papers and look into the research points and dive into it to your heart's content as much as you want to do. And that's what citizens who want to weigh in on this subject need to be able to do. My procedure always is to put linkages up so that any full text material that is available, I want the reader to be able to see it and follow it up so they never have to take my word for a damn thing, and I'll make it damned easy for them to do. All they got to do is go click and boop, and there they go. And make sure that they're active links and so forth and so on. I think everybody that does video platforms like this should be doing exactly that. Yes, well, in some cases, part of it certainly has to do with trawling either the title of the paper or the abstract. And you see exactly the same dynamic for those who've been following the channel when we go into the Casey Luskin list of where they've been trawling material, little bits in there, because it isn't even annotated. I mean, you can give the stupid transgender thing at Washington Examiner props for at least going to the point of putting up little annotation notes to it where they're saying why they think this is important. This sinks them even faster. But the Luskin file didn't even do that. They're just dumping these titles on you as though they are self-evidently in for their case. And though it is a boring procedure of going through paper by paper by paper by paper by paper, and I'm going to be going all through the bloody thing all the way down to the end. I'm about 10% into it at the moment. And again, I'm trying to do it in little blobs so that there's a comfortable amount. There's actually a limit to how big a video description can be. I think it's like 5,000 characters. And there have been maybe a quarter of the time when I have a particularly data heavy point, I've got to actually edit my text down to get it underneath that 5,000. Otherwise, it won't accept it as a video description. So those are the little foibles. The ones who don't do that, just simply putting up the little edit thing of where it's, although helpful to have a little breakdown of what their video interior is. If you're not having external sources available, that's fluff. And that's all surface. To me, the meat of the thing is if you're making a technical argument that's basing upon source data, you should want your reader to be able to find that information on their own, and that they can use that as a springboard to follow on. Because I don't think anybody should be depending on anything I say as the last word on the subject. I am at most a talking head secondary commentator who is making observations about material and screaming about source methods. And you shouldn't need to regard me as an oracle. You shouldn't, ever. You shouldn't regard anybody as an oracle. Use it as a source field in the same way that I use Wikipedia or various venues as springboards to find out material that I can track down and cross-check, which also simultaneously is measuring the reliability of the person involved. If you find that, if you look at the source material and I'm not misrepresenting the source material at any time, that presumably will raise your thumbs up to say that I'm fairly reliable. But I don't expect anybody to regard that as a blank check, although I think I will try to avoid ever making a misrepresentation on stuff and not shooting from the hip. It's another reason why I tend not to jump off the gangplank on what's the latest press release announcement. Just like the one that's right in the news at the moment about the discovery of possible signal of a life on an alien planet based upon some little chemicals that are presumably only produced by bacteria. And yet it's very controversial. Big posting up at Nature magazine, which is putting up all the doubts and caveats about whether this signal is real, whether the reading of how they're looking to decide what the chemicals are in fact valid or not. And so you want to wait for the dust to settle. And part of the problem with superficial ideologues is that they riff off of the press release that's just come out. I don't care what the press release is. I want to wait and see until it gets through the peer review process and see it land and find out where things are. Even then, you can get into troubles as we'll be going into an example in the new book about the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis that's been going back and forth in the technical literature for a decade or more. It's been ridiculously long. If you want your info to be right, learn to ready and analyze the data. Well, there's an area. Serious technical papers will have background accessibility. They'll have additional units that provide the data field, although a lot of this stuff is hard to find. For example, when John Whitmerapp had his stupid thing on the therapsids, where he was going after a bunch of cladistic papers, I had to get the original bloody papers to find the cladistic data numbers to check whether or not he had put the numbers in correctly into the little charts he was doing. And as it turned out, in many instances, he was not even inputting the numbers accurately, plus misreading the implications of the numbers that he did put in. And you can read all of that in grisly detail in Evolution Slam Dunk. Shameless plug to get the book. And so that same methodological matter can apply, just as when everybody is going to be out at the edge of their expertise. When I'm looking at the cosmological papers that I'm looking at, that have just mountains of formula for working out how they're studying a particular cosmological constant or something. It's way beyond my pay grade in terms of the physics, and I'm not checking their math to find out whether or not their summation sign has been improperly done or whether or not they should have made some modification to their variables. But I can look at the conclusions that are being brought up, and you can see what the current papers are and what they are citing and when these things become issues, because a lot of if there are any errors that are being made at any of the technical level, they're going to be banging that back and forth in their discussions. So all of that can operate at a higher tier that you can use, that even a scholar like me who has a background as a historian can still look at the fist fight to see how things are going, in the same way that I can make a judgment based upon the data that it doesn't look good for the impact hypothesis for the Younger Dryas. It's not that there might not have been a boloid that slammed into it, but it doesn't seem to have been playing a significant role. And there's an enormous amount of controversy about the supposed smoking gun evidence. Plus, that a lot of the people involved in the pro-impact side have baggage that shows up in other areas. Like one of the bunch is part of the group that tries to push the notion that Sodom and Gomorrah was a boloid impact. And they even are outside the traditional religious frame in that they are having a site for this supposed Sodom and Gomorrah that doesn't seem to fit any of the historical material that the regular biblical scholars are looking at. So all of that stuff is going to be gone into in the book, and it's a lot of fun little material. Oh yeah, it spoiled my willingness to go out and double check the original primary sources. Yeah, well, plus we also have the advantage that we've got just a spectacular availability of material. Archive.org is like a gold mine for really older stuff. It's sometimes in the mid-range of where a book that's from 1990 might be kind of hard to find, but a book from 1890 may actually be really easy to find. And I've made a great deal of use of that. There's going to be usages of that material in the discussion of 19th century racism and the attitudes that people had and the extent to which it was or was not connected to Darwinian evolutionary thinking, that requires you to be able to actually look at the original material to find out who is playing fast and loose with the data field or not. And spoiler alert, creationists play really fast and loose on this topic matter, which you can discover when you go to the point of looking up the original source material. And it's a fun, like, just as a one little aside there, a fellow, he ended up dying just shortly after he put his post up at the Discovery Institute. He was a Nigerian bishop who was reprising stuff from the Discovery Institute video apologetics. And he managed to mention this one scientist who was being put up as a serious example of a racist and the like. And there's a whole bunch of side issues that relate to that that I was able to delve into. But the fun part from a scholarly point of view is that the guy put the dates for these various people next to them, their birth and death dates. And he clearly had looked at the wrong person, because this Ernst Ziegler that he gave the dates for was not Ernst Ziegler, the zoologist, but Ernst Ziegler, the German fencer who died in World War I. Not the same person. The other one actually lived to 1925. And it meant that that was a further indication that there was a superficial level of the background material. One of the little foibles that I've been going into and in that we've been doing in the Rocks Were There book is that we list the full name in our reference noting. And that means that we have to go to the trouble of tracking down the person, and in some cases finding out whether they had died or not, and putting that information in that helps anchor that within a bigger context. Plus, you can find out as well that maybe there's a lot of controversy about that little person, and you need to find out a little bit more about what they've done, or maybe they changed their views over the years. And that's certainly the case with an awful lot of stuff on cosmology. There are people like Steinhardt and that have switched their position on inflation over the years, and others haven't. And some people that get authority quoted by some creationists on cosmological matters, and they didn't look to see just what a screwball these people were, even though, yeah, they got a physics degree and they even published some stuff in some science literature, but they've gone off the gangplank in years since, and nobody should be taking them terribly seriously. And in the regular scientific community, they aren't being taken seriously. So that's all a little part of the fun and games on things. Oh, and let me put up as well to thank everybody, including dear Ian Chen, who is one of our patrons. I'm very, very thankful for everybody that has been sticking with me all of this through the thick and thin of things. I fully recognize that with potentially bad economic times ahead, some people may have to rethink all of that, as we've had over the years. But anyway, I thank everybody at our colleagues level all the way down to our friends level, and as well as the legacy patrons who have at times been able to help and at other times have not. So there we go. Needless to say, I would love everybody in the universe to be helping out for the patron, or for that matter, buy the books. There you got sweat equity, direct content that you can deal with. Jackson and I are enormously proud of our Rocks for Their work. I'm very proud of Evolution Slam Dunk and the Paralogs novels that I'm continuing to work on. And I will be continuing to work on all these little projects so long as I jolly well can. And with everybody's help, there we go. So let's put up our little advert for the Rocks Were There from that Peter did. He'll probably be doing a new one for me, for us when we get the second volume out. And we are proceeding apace. Come. Let's get that little video up. There we go. My old little mouse died, the wireless one, so I have to do the little scrabble pad on the laptop, which is not the most comfortable thing for me to do, but that's the way things go. What can one do? And anyway, so in the world of the devout methodologist, we're going to be learning in many respects at the visceral level just exactly how high a price we pay if we let people who have unsound method get into power. And the Trump administration is shooting off the index at every level, including RFK Jr. We'll probably have a situation, if there was just a report on 60 Minutes tonight about the ongoing worries about the spread of bird flu, which at the moment is not a deadly serious thing, but there's nothing in principle that could prevent it from becoming a serious thing, because it's clearly starting to spread more easily into a variety of mammals, and all it needs is the right mutation, and kaboom. Even if it is only as serious as COVID, if it's easily spread and in spreading in a lot of contexts, by the time you notice it's there, you can be in trouble. A lot of the groups that are involved in this have been let go under Doge. You've still got a lot of states. Most of the states have testings for bird flu, so there's an infrastructure in place that can be built off. But nonetheless, a lot of murky things can happen. And I have no confidence whatsoever that the Trump administration can be any better at handling anything like this than they were in COVID, which is why I didn't want them to become in power again. And then there's all the other matters on the economics and the foreign policy, and putting basically Fox pundits in charge of so many different administrative posts and the like. And so it's all an ideological happy land that we're going to have to face the brunt of as shit hits fan. And from the bottom up, we're going to have to make these reforms educationally and politically and media, so that yes, also the internet, then people are just not taking H5N1 serious. Yes, exactly. And it's and that would be a concern even had Harris been president. But I wonder, for example, how COVID would have played out had Hillary Clinton been president in 2017. Certainly, they wouldn't have ended the pandemic response team that what's his name pulled the plug on in the Trump administration. Oh gosh, the political concern. He's now an anti-Trumper, by the way. He didn't like how Trump foreign policy worked out. Trying to think of his name. It's escaped me at the moment. Pompous guy with a bushy mustache. They got parodied every once in a while on Colbert. But anyway, it's only 1 or 2 mutations away becoming the next Black Death. Yeah, you can have that. So many of these viruses, it's just a tiny little sheath matter where suddenly, especially if it can be easily spread and is hard to detect and depend on an incubation time, a virus that isn't producing immediate symptoms in such a way that it can spread very quickly before you realize there's a serious problem there. And it will be up then to the states. I'm reasonably confident that our Washington state won't be stupid. And it may even be the case. There's even several potential bird flu vaccines, but the Trump administration has been pulling the brakes on their maintenance to see whether or not they can be tested and authorized. And there's no reason to think that screwball RFK is going to be any more reasonable in this area. So it will basically be ignoring the federal government. And it could be very, very exciting. And that's just if that one happens. I mean, is there any reason to think that there's some other one lurking around in the corner somewhere that can happen? Because in the jet age, viruses can happen very quickly. And virtually every epidemiologist that has a brain stem that's functioning is aware of the potential dangers that can happen in this area. So anyway, talking on that happy note, we'll just switch over to beware of the wooden penguins. And we'll see how everything goes. Everybody stay as safe as you can in climate and or political and in war zones for those who are in those. And we'll see what happens by the time of next week as we move into things. So everybody stay safe, and we will all see you kids next week. We are shutting down the stream until next week, which will be a Casey Luskin show again. Remember, every other week.